Let's now move on to the second set of questions. Question number 3. Among the different house styles, which one seems to be the most recent style? Among the different house styles, which one seems to enjoy the longest popularity? Again, you can pause the video here and open the dataset and take some time to ponder how you would go about answering these two questions. So we will still need to use the style to group by styles. And since we are trying to infer most recent style, the most appropriate column to use seems to be the age column, which indicates the age of each house. The first thought that might come to your mind will be, maybe we should just calculate average age for each style. So let's do that for now. I will again create a new pivot table by select the whole data set. I will go to Insert, Pivot Table, and again put it as a new worksheet. Now I just need to again drag the style into the rows area, and I will produce an average for age for each style of houses. Again, I need to change the sum to average. And again, similar to what we did before, I would also provide a rank that is according to the average. I would change average, then I would show it as rank. I would choose smallest to largest. Therefore, based on this result, we know that the style of expanded range has the average age of 28 years for each house, and is the newest for the 5 different styles. So it's plausible that the expanded range is the answer for our question number 3. Question number 4 asks, among different styles, which one seems to enjoy the longest popularity? If we go back to raw data, at first glance, it's not obvious what columns or combination of columns would provide such measure of popularity and its duration. So it might be helpful to just look at the age and see how old are these houses in each style first. So again, I will create another pivot table by following the same procedure. Insert pivot table, but this time I'm going to try to place it right under the pivot table we just created earlier. Which is this one. So I am going to drag age this time to the rows area. I'll then put style into the filter. Notice that the style is almost right adjacent to the previous pivot table. So I am gonna actually insert a few empty rows so they don't get mingled together. Now I'm gonna take a closer look at the age of all the houses in the cave style by using this drop down. I'll then again drag the age column into the values area and change it to count. So this way I can tell that these are the different ages for all the houses in cave style, and for the house that is 14 years old, there's only one house there, and there are 25 houses that were built 35 years ago. And to further facilitate understanding the results, I would represent these numeric information as a bar. So I'm going to just select this proper range for the data, and then I will go to insert and then insert a bar chart. And notice, since the raw data is coming from the pivot table, the resulting chart is also a dynamic pivot chart that would allow you to use drop-down menu to use this drop-down to choose a different style. Let's now take a closer look at cave style. The oldest house was built in 95 years ago. The newest house was built 14 years ago. And it seems that it has two peaks of popularity around 35 and 39 years ago, where a lot more cave style houses were built compared with other years. Let's also take a look at the colonial style. The picture is quite different. The oldest house was built 85 years ago. The newest 4 years ago. But compared with the cave style, the number of houses built in colonial style seem to be more stable. With the exception of 5 houses built in 60 years ago, most other years we only see 1 or 2 houses built in the colonial style. If you go over the remaining styles, you will find out they are more recent. So I'm going to just focus on comparing cave with colonial. So it would be great if we can show these two styles in the form of bar chart at the same time. My first attempt to do so is to go to Filter, and I will select multiple items. So now I can select both cave and colonial. However, this combined bar chart doesn't differentiate the two styles of houses, therefore not very useful for comparison. So my second attempt is to move style from filter to columns. Now two separate bar charts are created, one for cave in blue and one for colonial in red. And it's a lot more helpful right away because I can pick up a new insight that was not available in the previous bar charts. So notice, in the span of 90 years, colonial style were built, those red bars, for most of those years, whereas cave style had its peak popularity around 35 years ago, but very few of them here, very few of them were built in the last 30 years. So based on these observations, I will be inclined to say colonial style is the one that enjoys the longest popularity. We can do a side-by-side comparison between colonial and the remaining style to see if there's another contender for this title. But for the sake of time, I will just show you the comparison between colonial and ranch. So now let me also in the filter, select range style. Notice with 3 styles on the same chart, the bar chart now appears to be quite confusing already. So let me unselect the Cape style. Now it's a lot easier to understand what is happening here. So the range style also had peaks of popularity around 30 and 35 years ago. So 30 years ago there were 17 houses built in the range style. And for the range style is still doing quite well in recent years. You can see that in the last 20 years there are still houses built in range style, shown in these red bars. But colonial style was a lot older in terms of the style itself. The first one was built 85 years ago, compared with the first ranch house was built in 62 years ago. And also, for ranch style, there's a clear dropping of popularity comparing 30 years ago with now. There's a clear decrease in popularity. So based on these two observations, I will still stick with my answer being colonial is the style that enjoys the longest popularity. But it's quite reasonable that if you think otherwise, if you interpret the definition of popularity differently. This analysis also made me rethink about question 3. So we have seen that a new house can be built in an old style. For example, colonial isn't quite an old style, but this house was built in colonial only 4 years ago. So the average age of house might not be a good indicator of how recent a style is. Therefore, maybe we should look at when was the oldest house built in each style. So to do that, I would now select all. And again, as I said earlier, that the bar chart becomes quite confusing. So for this particular question we have in mind, these numbers might be easier to interpret. But as you can see, the pivot table itself has getting too large to scroll down. So I'm gonna again insert freezing. I would click on freeze panes. Now this title row is gonna stay put. So these are the houses built a year ago, and so on the other end, these are the older houses for each style. So as you can see that for Cape style, the oldest house was built 95 years ago, colonial 85 years ago, expanded ranch 50 years ago, ranch 62 years ago. How about split level? The oldest split level house was built 35 years ago. This result will suggest strongly that the split level was the most recent style. We have inferred earlier that the expanded range was the most recent style because it has the shortest average age, which turns out to be a false inference, because here we can see that there were 14 expanded ranch house in existence before the first split level house was built 35 years ago. So we went through quite lengthy analysis for these two seemingly simple questions. There are some statistics that we can compute that potentially are shortcuts to our answer if we know how to interpret them. So I will go back to our first pivot table by first unfreeze this, and I would add a number of other statistics into this pivot table. I would add age and change it to maximum. I will again add the age change to maximum, but then show it as rank. I will choose the from smallest to largest. So again, from this result, we can tell that of the oldest house of each style, the split level has the newest, rank number 1. So the oldest house in split level was built 35 years ago, the most recent one. And you can see the second recent one will be the expanded range, which was built 50 years ago. So there was a 15 years gap between these two styles. So now we can be even more certain that the split level was indeed the most recent style. I will further add 2 more statistics. I'll drag the age down to the value areas, but this time I will change it to standard deviation. I would do the same thing, and this time I would change it to again standard deviation, but I would show the value as rank, largest to smallest. I'm sure you have all heard of standard deviation, but you might be slightly unsure what it means compared with, say, average, max, these other statistics. So what standard deviation tries to capture is how widely spread a collection of numbers are. For example, let's get back to compare Cape and colonial bar charts. I would choose only Cape and colonial, like this. So this is the chart we have looked at earlier, and you will notice that the age of colonial houses, those represented in red bars, is almost evenly spread across the board, whereas the age of Cape houses is concentrated in the middle. So how can we come up with some numeric measure to describe the difference in the degree of spread between the Cape houses and colonial houses in terms of age? Standard deviation is just such a measure, which can be roughly understood as the average deviation from average. So to make the concept more concrete, let's look at the colonial house. We know it's the average age for the colonial house. The average age for the colonial house is 40 years. Now, if I look at the most recent house built in colonial is 4 years old. So the difference between 4 and 40 will be 36. So the difference between the first house with the average age will be 36 for colonial style. I can do the same thing for calculating the difference from average for each individual colonial house. Then I can average out all the differences, which is the basic idea of standard deviation. So the wider the spread, the larger the average difference from average, and the larger the standard deviation. And the more concentrated in the center, the smaller the average difference from average, the smaller the standard deviation. So that's the basic idea behind standard deviation, but its actual formula is slightly more complex than what I just described. So once we know how to interpret standard deviation by this pivot table result, I can tell that the colonial has the largest standard deviation in the age column, and the second largest standard deviation would be the expanded range. So based on this interpretation, again, I would say it's likely that colonial style is the one that stays popular for longest.